Now I am 25 years old. When this strange story happened to me, I was only 10. To this day, I remember her and tell everyone I know, and every time I seem to relive all those events that happened there, in a remote village at my great-grandmother's. My parents sent me to my grandmother for the summer holidays. There was an old abandoned church in the village, right next to the forest. It was almost invisible because of the thickets. No one went there. But I, walking, decided to get into it. With difficulty I went inside. It was creepy, but very interesting. I was walking around with a flashlight and looking at dusty books lying around, candle stubs, dishes, and suddenly I got lost. Strange, because the church was quite small. From the outside it seemed no bigger than an outhouse. But I wandered through it and couldn't find a way out. I came across a lot of small rooms. I became insanely scared. Panic began to take hold. And then strange things began to happen. Candles began to light up near the ceiling. One would light up and go out, light up again, go out. And they burn with a bright flame, then some kind of dull blue. Suddenly there was a terrible smell of burning. It became difficult for me to breathe. I started screaming, calling for help, but this made it even scarier. My voice became unnatural, terrible. It sounded like the howl of some wild animal. I was scared of my own voice. I started running around the church like crazy, bumping into walls. They were in a nightmare web. I was all tangled up in it. I felt spiders running over me. I fell. My foot got stuck between the boards and the floor. I couldn't pull it out for a long time, sitting on the floor. Then I saw a silhouette of a very tall man in a hood appear in the corner. He stood and baptized me with slow movements of his hand. When I got out, I finally saw the exit door, but for some reason I couldn't move my legs. I was paralyzed. Something pulled me back, as if attracted, and I heard an incomprehensible voice, either female or male, reciting a prayer. I don't know how long it lasted, but it seemed to me that an eternity had passed. I don't remember how I got out, but I didn't talk for 2 days, and I got a gray lock of hair on my head. My parents had to come and take me home. My grandmother's neighbor told them that he saw me run out of those thickets like crazy, and a huge wolf ran after me. He quickly disappeared from sight. Everyone thought I was scared of a wolf, but I didn't even see him. I haven't told my parents that I was in church until now. The second story. In the mid-80s, my dad, then still a guy of 16 or 17, often went hiking with his older brother and his friends to Karelia. Their hikes were long, thorough, on rafts and kayaks, with a lot of equipment, so they sometimes climbed very far and deep into the wilderness. Of course, we often stumbled upon abandoned villages near the banks of rivers. They liked to climb and look at them, but they never spent the night there, even if the houses were well preserved. Firstly, it is more convenient in a modern tent, and secondly, it is simply uncomfortable. There is no mysticism, but there is still a feeling that you are being watched from empty houses. Usually, when they set up camp, Dad and his friend of the same age, having done everything that was required of them, went for a walk around the neighborhood to pick berries, mushrooms, if the season. My dad still loves berries to the point of insanity. Well, just to see what and how. Then it was even more or less calm in those places. It was then, in the stormy 90s, the hikes had to be stopped. The local population was completely stupefied. They took food from tourists, and even worse things they did. But then it was still possible to walk freely, without fear of bumping into something dangerous. So, Dad and his friend were walking through the forest, making their way as they had to, because there were no paths there. Clearly no one had lived in the nearest village for a long time, or at least no one had walked in this part of the forest. The trees around were tall, standing densely. And suddenly, having rounded another tree, Dad almost ran into a wooden wall. It's hard to believe, but he still claims that he didn't see her at all, either between the trees or above the tops. On closer inspection, it turned out that he and his friend went to an abandoned church. Or even just a chapel, because the whole structure consisted of a single turret with a pointed, so-called tent, vault and a cross on its top. Dad immediately noticed a number of oddities. Firstly, why is the chapel so far from the nearest village? Villagers would hardly walk such a distance on foot. Besides, let me remind you, no paths have been preserved, not to mention any road for carts and other transport. There is not the slightest trace, nor, for example, younger trees and bushes where there could once have been a well-trodden, but now overgrown road. Old tall trees surrounded the chapel almost closely. It's like she just grew up like that with them. Secondly, all the windows and the door were very tightly boarded up with strong large boards, securely so, and not as they usually do with abandoned buildings, blunder, crosswise. Even the tallest and smallest windows were sealed in this way. When Dad got closer, he saw that something was neatly scrawled on them. It was similar to the old Slavonic script. He was already very seriously interested in history at the age of 16, but he could not make out a single letter, let alone words. And, thirdly, the most disturbing thing, the Pope noticed it when he and his friend walked around the church in a circle and looked up again. The cross is no longer visible under the birds sitting on it. Dad didn't really understand the types of birds, and he didn't look closely because he was too scared. He did not hear how so many birds suddenly flew at once. And the birds were silent. They didn't chirp, they didn't rustle their feathers, they didn't shout, they didn't make any sounds. Here it is necessary to make a remark. My dad has never been a religious person, he rather does not like Christianity. But at that time he was already seriously engaged in Oriental martial arts and always perceived it not only as a sport, but also as a philosophy, as something esoteric. He always managed to feel the energy of places and people. I personally believe in such things too. In the future he became a very good masser, for example. At that moment, however, he didn't understand much about it yet, but he just realized, this place is not good, very bad. And it noticed them with a friend. Then Dad blocked his friend's way, as if he was on the line between his friend and the birds, who seemed to be all staring at them, and said that it was better to leave here. The friend did not resist, he did not like the place either. Dad backed away for a long time, but finally turned away. When they walked a few meters away from the creepy chapel, Dad is still ready to swear to it, he saw some movement to his left. It's as if some dark hand is reaching for his shoulder. He turned sharply and jumped back, but there was nothing behind him, only the forest. And the chapel was again not to be seen, as if it had never stood there. For some reason, Dad was sure that if they decided to come back now, they wouldn't find anything in this place. They returned to the camp without incident, and the hike ended quite successfully. Only since then, Dad sometimes sees things out of the corner of his left eye that people probably shouldn't see. I inherited this ability from him, and my younger brother even more so. They sometimes come and stand at his feet when he lies in bed at night.